Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's an honor to be here today and participate in the Danish fashion and textile event. So my name is Mei Chen. I joined Alibaba around a year and a half. Here today, I would like to share with you some of the things that I have learned in that journey since I joined Alibaba. I could say I would like you to leave with three things. One, the growth of fashion in the changing landscape in China and the consumer behaviors in China. How shopping, social shopping is very important in Chinese consumption. And last but not least, how do we as a company work with retailers and fashion companies from Denmark and around the world? So let's begin. Who has been in China this year? Raise your hand. In the last 5 years? 10? 20? Okay, so more or less everybody could have been in China in the last 20, 27 years or so. So this is how China, downtown Shanghai, looked like in 1990s. That's the city center of one of the biggest cities in China, Shanghai. Has around, just to put it in perspective, has around 27 million people in only that city. That's a couple of times bigger than the whole Denmark. I'll show you a picture now, fast forward today, of how China looks, the same place, downtown Shanghai. Compare these two pictures. So in the second picture, you'll see a huge amount of tall buildings, skyscrapers, a huge amount of office buildings, and very much developed. That's how China looks today, 27 years afterwards. If you do the same comparison pick a place in Denmark, Copenhagen, downtown, and take a picture of 20, 25 years ago and today, probably the amount of change that you see is actually not that big. And that's one of the reasons when you talk to Chinese business people, why they're always in a rush. Because if you think about it, there's always business opportunities coming up. So people in China are always keeping up with that. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why they're always in a rush. If you've been to China, you probably have noticed that. So that incredible amount of growth is actually also been transformed into the consumer behavior. I'll show you a picture of how actually the generation of my parents dressed. That's the fashion, and that's the models that they could look after. But if you actually look at the consumers today in China, that's more or less how consumers do really look like today. Everybody is different. Everybody wants to express their individuality from what they wear, what they eat, and what they put on themselves. Basically, food, fashion, and cosmetics. So everybody looks very different in China currently. And this is the current middle class in China. And based on studies of McKinsey, by 2020, there will be more than 500 million middle class population. And let's pause on that now a little bit. I'm saying middle class. That's the growth and the consumption growth is going to come from this Chinese consumers online. And that middle class is very interesting because they're not looking just to satisfy their basic needs, but actually what they're looking for is to look for the latest trends, where they're coming from Denmark, France, the US, etc. So they're always following the key opinion leaders in China, in the Western world, to look for the latest of everything. And that pace actually is very interesting, especially in the top-tier cities in China, where they not only have access to online, but also offline, but even more in the lower-tier cities. And by top-tier cities, I mean Shanghai or Beijing, that has around 25 to 27 million population. But a second-tier city like Hangzhou, which is 1 hour away from Shanghai, for example, already has 12 million people in terms of population. And there's more cities with more than 10 million in population in China than cities, for example, in Denmark. And so what is very interesting is how those consumers interact with companies and brands in China and all around the world. These consumers are super social. So they follow the latest trends in fashion, in luxury, in cosmetics, and they're very much influenced by what we call in China key opinion leaders or KOLs. So if you think about the Chinese consumers, and they spend around half an hour in the Alibaba's Tmall app, which is basically the marketplace or the shopping marketplace, per day. If you compare that to the Western world, actually, the Western consumers spend around 5 to 6 minutes per day, and that's something that I think most recent Boston Consulting Group share. And that's not because Chinese consumers shop more in that half an hour, but it's because the shopping experience is more social than anywhere else that I have seen. And the interesting thing about how they shop online is that everything starts with social and therefore ends with social. And that shopping experience is very much not only a single touch point, but multiple touch points. A big difference, between the Western world and China is that China is very much marketplace-driven. But let me put this into perspective. So currently in China, there's around 730 million people using the internet, so internet users. That within the Chinese population is more than 60%, around 55 to 60%. There's in total around 1.3 billion people in China overall. So if you compare that to Europe or even the US, that's more than twice the US population, or almost as big as the whole population of Europe, 739 million. So Chinese consumption and that middle class that we're talking about is a huge opportunity for fashion brands and fashion retailers. So I was talking a little bit about marketplaces in China. The importance of marketplaces in China is very big because if you think about the Western world, you look at how the Western world looks like. Usually, in any given market, you'll have 4, 5, 6 players that could have anything between 15 to 20% of market share of that country, whether it's in the Nordics, in the US, in the UK, France, you name it. However, in China, the graph, actually that same graph looks very much different. First, consumers don't start their shopping with a search query or a search engine. This is not how consumers shop and interact with brands in China, which is very much different to the Western world. They actually go into a marketplace and search for the products, the brand, or a combination of both. And in the graph of the China e-commerce, the orange is basically the percentage or the market share of Alibaba's B2C business-to-consumer platform. And this is if we take all the different categories, including fashion, cosmetics, luxury cars, FMCG, etc. In fashion, specifically, that graph actually looks slightly different. For Alibaba and the B2C marketplace that we have, that's around 80% of the market share. So if you combine the second and the third player, by the way, the second and the third player in China are also marketplaces. Alibaba is 2 to 3 times bigger than the second and the third, all combined. So that's extremely interesting because as a Western brand, as a Western company, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about how do I go international is how do I translate my website to that language, Chinese, for example. How do I make my website more mobile responsive if I'm gonna want to go mobile? Whereas in China, that actually is not the way of thinking if you really want to tackle this big opportunity and reach the Chinese consumers. Another very interesting fact about China is how mobile penetrated it's, which we'll come back in a second. Just to give you perspective of Alibaba, most of the times since I joined the company, when I talk to a lot of people, the three things that come to mind when you know Alibaba are Jack Ma, a huge IPO in 2014 in the US, and usually some sort of like big e-commerce company. So let me give you a little bit more of details of what we do and who we are. So last year alone, if we talk about mobile, we have a mobile in terms of monthly active users, more than 500 million, more than 500 million. And we also have an arm that helps delivering goods, logistics. And on any given average day, usually there's more than 42 million packages managed by our logistics company called Cainiao. That's around 8 to 9 times bigger than the Danish population. Put that into perspective, that's around 80% of the UK population, 60 million people. And in the last 12 months, we have around 460 million active consumers shopping in our platforms. And it also puts us as the biggest or the first Chinese or Asian company to break the mark of 400 million in terms of market valuation. So that's our company, and I'll give you a little bit more details of what we do. The core of the company is very much focused on commerce and e-commerce and online commerce. We started the company in 1999, founded by Jack Ma and 18 founders. And we created the first marketplace we created was called Alibaba.com, that you can see in the graph of core commerce. That was basically a marketplace and a platform for companies to find suppliers from China in 1999. Ever since then, we have expanded that to global suppliers and companies from all around the world sourcing from the globe. Then, when the SARS came in 2003, one of the things that we thought it was quite helpful for the consumers in China as they could not go out, it was basically creating an e-commerce platform for consumers to consumers called Taobao, which is a C2C marketplace that any consumers could sell their goods to another in China. That has grown very much because when we created that marketplace, actually, it was when the internet actually started in China. So one of the reasons why China is so marketplace-driven is that we have actually some fault on that or some influence in that. We created the marketplace when the penetration of the internet was really low, and therefore the consumers actually grew with that concept of marketplaces and searching and buying. And then in 2008, as we realized more and more brands and more consumers were looking for branded goods coming from overseas, we created a marketplace called Tmall, which is the one in red at the top. And Tmall is a marketplace that most of the international brands and the leading international brands are selling their products to China, whether it's fashion, like for example, the bestseller group in Denmark, or Zara or Inditex in Spain, selling directly to consumers in China. One of the differences between us and any other potential e-commerce companies in the world is that we don't actually hold the stock. It's basically the brands and the retailers that set the strategy, hold the stock, and you decide how to target those consumers. Then we have also created other marketplaces around the same concept for Timur Global, which is a cross-border option for international retailers that do not have a presence in China, for example. And then Lazada, which was one of the latest investments strategically that we did in Southeast Asia, which is another very strategic growth market for Alibaba, covering 6 markets, from Singapore to Vietnam to Thailand or Indonesia. And then we are also doing and creating our own marketplace in India. So very much for us, as we see it, China is very important. Southeast Asia is extremely important. And the reasons for that is because a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, our founder, Jack Ma, set a vision of reaching. We only have now 500 million consumers, and I say only. And he set a vision of, in the next 15 years or so, to reach 2 billion consumers through our marketplaces. The only way for us to do that strategically is not to target probably the West, but really to target the East, Asia, China, Southeast Asia, and India, which are the very high growth markets as the internet penetrates those regions. And then you see in the middle something called digital and media entertainment. We have built a whole ecosystem around that. And the reason of that is because consumers in China are extremely social. They are very much influenced about social. For example, Youku Tudou. Youku Tudou is basically the equivalent of Alphabet or Google's YouTube in the Western world. It's leading a video market, video platform in China. Then you have things like Ali Music that we have created a couple of years ago, or even Ali Pictures Entertainment, where we have partnered with Steven Spielberg in the US. So yes, we do also produce films and movies. So last but not least is very much the local services. We have created companies around travel. For example, Ali Trip. Guess how many people from China travel overseas every year? Any guesses? There's more than 120 million people from China traveling overseas every year. So imagine how big that business is for a lot of brands and for a lot of companies. Or Ele.me, which is equivalent of a food delivery service like Deliveroo or Deliver here in the Western world. Last but not least is very much the services that actually, or the technologies that we have created to support the growth of the brands that we partner with, the companies that we work with, and the retailers that we partner with. One very important is payments, Alipay. Alipay is the leading payments platform in China. Nobody in China goes around with credit cards. That's kind of like old school in China. Everybody goes around with their phones and battery and 3G or 4G. That's all you need to survive in China. Whether you want to go to a fancy restaurant, you want to pay your utility bills, or you want to buy free apples at the supermarket. That's the payment method that Chinese consumers use. Same for logistics. We created a technology company called Cainiao to help facilitate that for brands coming from overseas. Alimama, for example, which are the marketing capabilities company that we have created, probably does a bigger business than our e-commerce business at this moment, because all the consumers, most of the consumers in China, actually searching our marketplace. So how do you get your brand to be more prominent within that marketplace? And last but not least, cloud services. We went and created our own cloud services because we have something called Singles Day that I will speak in a few seconds, which is the biggest shopping festival in the world. And we realized that none of the existing cloud services could support the volume of trade in 24 hours. So all in all, across the whole ecosystem that we have created at the core of e-commerce, our aim and our mission is very much to help to make it easy for any businesses, small, medium, or big, to do business anywhere, whether it's in China now, in Southeast Asia, and soon globally. So I talked about Singles Day just a couple of seconds ago. Singles Day, it's the biggest shopping festival in the world. And happens every year on November 11th. The name comes from 1111. So basically, that was a festival that was created for single people in China. But today, actually, it's a social event for everybody in China. It's like, for example, in the US, when you mark the day of the Super Bowl or the Oscars, that's how big the Singles Day is now in China. Last year, the brands that we work with on Timur, on our B2C platforms, generated around $17.8 billion in just one day. Think about Black Friday or Cyber Monday. That's a couple of times bigger than actually Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined. So that's the power of consumption in China. And I will show you a little video about what happened during Singles Day last year. We actually, ever since 2 years ago, we started with something called Singles Day Gala, which is basically an event that we host 4 hours before midnight when the shopping starts, of a huge entertainment. And you'll understand why entertainment is a big piece for our company, working with brands around the world. You'll see a lot of international celebrities in that short video, and that's because more and more Chinese consumers are looking abroad. Last but not least is mobile. Mobile, before we move to the video, it's the mobile transactions in our platform across the different categories is more than 82%. People don't use computers to shop. Chinese consumers and China leapfrog any leading economies in terms of mobile. In the Western world, if your mobile transactions are around, say, 40%, 45%, 50%, probably you're the best in your market and you're the leader in your market. That's actually not acceptable in China. 82% is across all the categories. And for fashion specifically, that's 90%. Think about it. 9 out of 10 consumers in China, in the leading marketplace for fashion, they're shopping on mobile. So mobile responsive website is given. It's not something that you should consider, but you should do it. So I'll play a very short video about Singles Day, just to give you a sense of what actually Singles Day Gala is. And this was created by our current CEO, Daniel Zhang, 8 years ago. And I think that's probably the biggest shopping extravaganzas I have ever seen in the world.
China is a very, very special place. We love the people here. We feel like we're coming home when we come to China.
Thank you for having us on. It's great to be here in China. We're obviously huge fans, and we thank everybody for the support because it's really incredible every time that we come to China. So thank you.
I'll stop it there because there's a huge amount of Chinese celebrities that you may not recognize. But last year we have the Beckons. They're all the kids connected through a video conference. One Republic, Kobe Bryant, Scarlett Johansson, and a few more international celebrities. And then the celebrities that came afterwards are kind of the equivalent of those international celebrities, but in China. So probably you won't recognize them, but imagine being a celebrity in China. I'll tell you a story about that I was reading yesterday before coming. There's a celebrity in China called Lu Hang. And Lu Hang is, he was born in the 1990s, so quite young. He's a singer, a male singer in China. And he has millions and millions of followers in the Chinese Twitter, Weibo. He crushed yesterday Weibo by tweeting or Weiboing one single thing. He said, all in Chinese, "Let me introduce you to my girlfriend." That crashed the internet yesterday, and you can actually look it up on Google. So people were a little bit, some people were happy, others were quite annoyed by the fact that he had a girlfriend. But that single kind of like Weibo or tweet crashed the services of Weibo, which is a company that we have a stake on in China. So just one tweet. So mobile, and this is a picture that I took in Shanghai a couple of months ago, which is very interesting. In the Western world, like for example here in Denmark, Copenhagen, you have streets for bikes. In China, that was quite interesting. You have a line for people that are on their mobile phones, because there's so many people looking at the mobile phones that, you know, like they created this just for as a joke. So that was quite interesting. So mobile is first in China. Everything happens through mobile. You need to have your websites, your products adapted to that small device and that small screen. And that's where everything happens in China with consumers. So a bit more a deep dive of the marketplace and our marketplace, specifically Tmall. It's very much a lifestyle destination for Chinese consumers. In that marketplace, I told you about it a few seconds ago, why, you know, that in China, consumers actually spend more than half an hour on average per day in our marketplace. And that's, again, not because they shop more, but because we created a consumer community and social, we added social to that. It's like having your news feed every morning of brands not only publishing the latest collections, but also interacting with key opinion leaders. We do things within the marketplace like live stream that I will talk about in a few seconds too. Also, it's very shareable. Your friends, you know, like there's, within our marketplace, more than 60% of the consumers on Tmall are actually under the age of 30 years old. Imagine how young the consumer is in China, in our marketplace, where it's very different from the Western world, when most of the consumers are probably slightly more aged than 30 years on average, or at least the vast majority. And then all those consumers, especially the younger generation of consumers, are very much social. So every day in our platform, there's more than 20 million comments generated by users. So basically, consumer, a friend of mine in China, buying, you know, a Zara blazer and sharing the pictures of how she looks like, how comfortable is it, or, you know, how does that blazer match with the shoes that she just bought recently? So it's very much consumer-driven and very much social. What is even more interesting is that we have ways to build that through what we call live streamings, and also Weitao, which is for fans, you know, consumers that have bookmarked your pages or your brand pages in China, and with whom you can kind of like do online parties through Tmall. A big thing in China is live streamings, and that's something that probably in the Western world we have seen emerge in the last probably 6 to 12 months, but it's nowhere near at the level of China. And I'll show you a couple of examples of some brands that have done that in the last 6 months in China, very big brands, but depending of the scale that you are at, you work with bigger or smaller key opinion influencers in China. And this is, for example, of Maybelline. Maybelline partnered recently with someone called Angelababy. And Angelababy, it's, I could say, the equivalent of, in a way, the Kim Kardashian of the US. She's a big deal in China. She did a live streaming with Maybelline on their launch of a new lip gloss. And it was basically live streaming showing a how-to, in a way. More than 5 million consumers turned in to see that live streaming. And in less than 2 hours, they were able to sell more than 10,000 units of that single lip gloss. So it is very important, depending on how you want to reach those consumers, live stream in a sense or another should be very important for you. And there's more brands like Makeup Forever, Vichy, etc. So that's one of the ways for you to work with Alibaba, through Alibaba to reach those consumers, live streamings, and Weitao. So before I start the last video, I just want to share with you something that we started doing 2 years ago. So this year is the second edition, but it's called Timur Collection. And Timur Collection is basically our own fashion show, but rethought. It's not like the fashion shows that you'll see here in Copenhagen, Paris, London, New York, where you run in, you sit for 10 minutes, you see the runway show for 10 minutes, and then you run to the next show. Again, China consumers are very social, and they're very much influenced by celebrities. So what we have done is we have pulled together all the latest technologies that we have and developed internally on the see now, buy now, on influencers, and also real-time interaction through our apps. And last year, for the first time, we came out with this event called Timur Collection, which was an 8-hour show in Shanghai, live streamed through all the apps that you have seen in the ecosystem, Tmall, Taobao, Weibo, to China. So reaching a potential of more than 500 million. What we have done differently this year is that we are actually doing the same thing as last year, plus we have started a strategic partnership with New York Fashion Week. Second, we're not satisfied with the 500 million consumers. So we decided that this year we're taking it to the next level by also going on TV in China, national TV. And then last but not least, we started partnering with more international brands even. So this year we'll have the likes of Burberry, Adidas by Stella McCartney, Fila, Sandro, March. So leading international brands like Victoria's Secret, for example. So there's a huge amount of demand from Chinese consumers there. And if you want to participate as an attendee, of course, this year, please let me know. I still have, I think, a few tickets. It's on the 20th of October in a week or so time in Shanghai. And we will host it with our VIP brands and partners. So I will show you a video of the highlights of what happened last year. You'll see a lot of famous people that you may not recognize, but those are the leading celebrities in China. And being a leading celebrity in China, it means not 1 million followers on Instagram. It means a couple of million followers on the kind of like equivalent of Instagram in China. that was last year, and one of the first models that you saw was He Sui. You probably have not recognized her, but she's one of the Victoria's Secret models globally. So all this, we're putting this together because we know how many touch points Chinese consumer needs, how social they need to be interacting with brands constantly, because it's very much about the social experience. And one of the most interesting things is that actually consumers in China don't go to bed with Facebook, don't wake up with Facebook like we do in the Western world. Consumers in China go to bed with Taobao and Tmall, and the first thing you check, if you ask any of your friends in China, is probably Taobao or Tmall a couple of times per day. That's very different from the Western world, and that's something that will remain as consumers evolve and look for more brands internationally. And I will leave you with a quote from Jack Ma, because China is a very big opportunity. But what he says, actually, is that today is very difficult, and usually in the Western world, we'll finish that sentence by, tomorrow is very bright. But however, Jack Ma, our founder, says that tomorrow is even more difficult. China is very challenging, but at the same time, it's full of opportunities. And it's very much for the takers and for the ones that really commit to understand the Chinese consumers. And that's very different to how you do things in the Western world, and how you target consumers in the Western world, and how you interact with consumers in the Western world. Thank you.